we seem to have a serious problem. Take a look at this.
You're asylum seekers in the hotel. Could you tell me why you're working? Yeah, no, sorry. Is there a reason why you're working as a courier? Why are you covering your face? Is there a reason why you ignored me? I'm just asking him why he's working. Justin.
Now, this video and investigation by The Express, which I'll link below, quite clearly shows that asylum seekers appear to be working as couriers out of a central London migrant hotel, which is obviously, I think it's obvious, in breach of the Home Office regulations that they are not allowed to be working whilst they are here to claim asylum, except for very few that have had their application for more than 12 months or whatever the rules are. There are some very narrow rules that they can, and then there's specific rules about how they work and so on, but this appears to be a massive problem. Now, I'm going to come back later in the video to show you quite starkly where that is coming from, and quite frankly, what I think they should do about it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I think they watch my videos and take my advice and so on, but perhaps they should, and perhaps they should, because it'll be quite an easy way to try and find out where these people are and where the problem starts. But first of all, let's go to another problem with this, because not only are there, let's have a look at the latest statistics here. Over 6 days alone, not including yesterday, there were 2,083 illegal migrants across the Channel. And that makes over 4,000 this month alone, which is over 40,000 since Labour came into power, despite saying they were going to stop this from happening. Now, as with the usual caveat from a humanitarian standpoint, some people really do need help, and perhaps we should help those. But the counter question is, how do they fare against British citizens? Now, when we take a look at stories like this one, which again are verifiably backed up by statistics from local authorities and so on, the Daily Mail reports that there is proof that they say that the UK cares more about asylum seekers than its own citizens. These figures reveal that councils are housing up to 10 times more asylum seekers than homeless people. Now, just pausing there to give you the other side of this coin, because this is what I like to do. There are always two sides to a story, even if some of the trolls think that by telling you both sides, I'm favouring one side over another and therefore I am biased or whatever, but that's just their point of view. I allow them their point of view. I'm not going to criticise them for that. But the Home Office point of view on this is they can't control where homeless people live. And so the disparity, which I'll show in a minute, is nothing to do with whether the councils are prioritising asylum seekers, moreover that they can't control where homeless people live. But when you look at some of the numbers, I frankly don't buy it. So I'm allowed to give you my opinion sometimes, but I also try to give you both points of view, such as the Home Office response to these statistics. Now, taking the worst example, which the Daily Mail calls the biggest disparity in these statistics, in Pendle, only 9 homeless households are in temporary accommodation, as against 453 asylum seekers within the same area. The fuller picture revealed by the Daily Mail's investigation, which again I'll link below, shows an interactive map here where you can zoom in and out, and the darkness of the colour on this map shows you the concentration of asylum seekers being housed in this area. They say Home Office data shows 89,000 asylum seekers, the equivalent of the town of Stevenage, Hastings or Southport, were being housed across England at the end of March. And so you can see at a glance here from this interactive map, some of the areas are indeed much more concentrated than others. Taking this random area here, Bolsover, if I pronounce that correctly, asylum seekers housed 112, whereas homeless households are just 9. Which is a rate of 1,244% compared to homeless households. Taking another area at random here, Stoke-on-Trent, housing 1,223 asylum seekers as against 81 homeless households, which is a 1,510% difference. Now, as you know, I cover a wide range of stories on this channel, and every story has multiple points of view, particularly those political stories, such as this one here. Now, this is a company I work with called Ground News that provides you both sides of a story, so allow me to illustrate just how different these can be. This was about Miliband opening up the door to North Sea drilling, after so long saying that that's not going to happen. Now, whether it's a politically left or right-leaning news outlet, you might get a very different story. Now for that, this will show you a bias distribution of those covering the story, whether they lean left or right. And there's also a factuality score on the right-hand side here. So 60% of the sources are highly factual when they report these stories. But let's take a look at some of the headlines here, just by way of example. Left-leaning outlets just say, new environmental guidance published for the halted North Sea oil and gas projects. And UK announces tougher emissions tests for Rosebank and Jackdaw fields, and talking about the opening up of North Sea drilling. However, when we look at the right-leaning headlines, this quite obviously then chalks this up as a massive U-turn. We have the Daily Express, Miliband U-turns on drilling in the North Sea, despite the climate vandalism remarks. And GB News goes with desperate, Ed Miliband opens the door to North Sea drilling, despite labelling the crucial venture climate vandalism. So very different points of view, whether they lean left or right. So it's important to get both sides of the picture. But sometimes there'll be stories that are not covered by either the left or the right, and that's why Ground News has a blind spot feature up here when you click here. For example, here it shows you low coverage from left sources on Israel's Netanyahu saying that Iran's leadership is not a goal but could be a result. So when you click into this story, clearly only 15% on the bias distribution lean left and far more sources are leaning right. Ground News is both an app and a website and has a customizable For You news feed, and you can even search by a keyword or the URL of an article that you've already read. And of course, as a partner to my channel, I get you a fantastic discount, which is 40% off. That's 40% off. You can either use the scanny QR code on screen right now or the link ground.news/BBB, and that will take you directly to a discount. And that link is in the description below. So whether you want to stay on top of the news, whether that's in the UK or internationally, and you want to make sure that you get both sides of the story, check out Ground News with my link ground.news/BBB for a 40% discount for unlimited access to the world's news. At least then you know that you haven't been misled or missed part of the story. Now, as I say, there's always two ways to look at something and two ways to interpret something. It could be spun positively, it could be spun negatively. And this really is the cut and thrust of politics, or even statistics, because you might take one statistic and view it through one particular lens, and it will give you a very different picture than if you view it a different way. Taking, for example, the Refugee Council website here. This is no criticism, Refugee Council, if you do look at my video here. This is just giving people a different perspective on the way of looking at things. Now, on the one hand, this seeks to sort of re-educate people as to learning the facts about asylum seekers, what it means to be a refugee or seeking asylum. So again, you could look at this two very different ways. On the one hand, looking at the 1951 United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees, a refugee is a person who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or political opinion, is outside of their country of his nationality, and is unable, or owing to such fear, unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country, etc. And so, on the one hand, you might say that this person has a strong belief that they are going to be persecuted, punished, imprisoned, and whatever in their home country, therefore they need our help. So, from a humanitarian standpoint, we should help, and the United Nations Convention relating to refugees says so. The flip side of that is that ECHR and such rights that are underpinning this status of a refugee are being used as methods of appeal to prevent deportations of aggressive criminals who are in this country. For example, someone who has committed heinous crimes and now saying that if he were to return to his home country, would be persecuted for having committed those crimes and thus feared for his safety, that has been put forward as a reason not to be deported. But I'm sure that's not quite what they had in mind when they drafted this in 1951. Even when looking at some basic definitions here, person seeking asylum versus migrant, the Refugee Council says we should use the term person seeking asylum instead of asylum seeker. I don't really see the difference, but they say that asylum seeker is dehumanizing. They say a person seeking asylum is a person who's left their country of origin and formally applied for asylum in another country, but whose application has not been concluded. They then say migrant is a person who's moved to another country for other reasons, such as to find work. So presumably other reasons means not the reasons described above for asylum. Although the government website repeatedly uses the words irregular migration on this website here when talking about statistics. So again, it depends on how you look at these things, and terms are interchangeable and somewhat subjective in what you think about. Moving on, and again, there are different ways of looking at things, and bearing in mind that the Refugee Council is predominantly, I think, trying to educate people in the UK, if not worldwide, says the following at point 3. 41% of displaced people across the world are children. Which may well be true, I've no reason to doubt that. However, if you were to read this and this alone in the UK, you might then be led to believe that 41% of illegal or irregular migrants, or whatever you want to call them, coming to the UK are children, which is obviously not true, because the government statistics themselves tell you that since 2018, so this is normalised over a much longer period of time, 70% of people detected arriving irregularly have been adult males aged 18 and over. And I understand that more recent figures show this to be more in the region of 90%. The last example I'll give you, and I promise Refugee Council, I'm not using this to criticise you, I'm just giving two different perspectives on how to read these things. At point 6, they say people seeking asylum do not get large handouts from the state. Now, this much is true in the sense that they are probably living on next to nothing, albeit they are provided accommodation, they are provided food, and if not food, money with which to buy food and basic clothing. It is not very much money, they are living on next to nothing, and so they aren't exactly living a complete life of luxury as many people might see it. The flip side of that is, of course, that they do receive housing and they do receive food, and therefore they do receive all of this stuff and healthcare and education and everything else for nothing, which everybody else pays for. So there are two very different ways of looking at this. So on the one hand, they are people that genuinely need help and are given the very basics with which to survive. And on the other hand, they are given free housing, free food and other things, and other people are upset about that because they work very hard for them. So again, two very different ways of looking at these things. But coming full circle to this video from Daily Express, again, which is linked below, we see here a lot of bikes, e-bikes with Deliveroo, Just Eat or whatever, courier bags on these bikes, and that raises the concern that these are working illegally because they're not supposed to be working as asylum seekers. I didn't think for a moment that it would be this obvious, this easy to find, and this much in plain sight as it is, but take a look at this. I popped over onto Facebook. I am on Facebook, by the way. Do pop over there and follow me. I don't do a lot there because not many people follow me there, but if you wish to, do follow my page there and I'll put some more stuff on there. But take a look at this. Now, I understood that these delivery drivers, when they do jobs like this, they are referred to gigs. Now, anyone who's been in the music industry before will know that a gig is doing something quick for money. Quick just being like one event, one show, or whatever. So a gig. Obviously, most people are familiar with the term gig, but just for those that are not. So they're referred to as gigs. So I popped into Facebook and put gig Deliveroo just to see whether this was a thing. Now, this will bear some explanation because some people might be thinking, well, why am I showing a list of Facebook groups here with Deliveroo? I will explain. It's very simple. Now, to get an account with Deliveroo or Just Eat or whatever, first of all, you have to show who you are, show ID and that sort of thing. But you also have to show, according to their rules, because I checked, you have to show that you are allowed to work. You have the right to work in the UK. Now, obviously, I hope that it's obvious, as an illegal migrant in the UK, whatever else you want to call them, asylum seekers or whatever Refugee Council say we should call them, they can't prove that they can work in the UK because they're not supposed to work in the UK unless they've been given permission, their appeal or their case has been outstanding for so long, or those rules that apply. So if they can't do that, how on earth can they work? Well, it's quite simple. They rent someone else's account, and hence the gig. So they pay 50, 70, £100 per week to one person who has this account, and then they go off and do jobs on that account. Now, I'm quite sure that Deliveroo, Just Eat and everybody else would be able to identify these accounts, because surely if they've got a dozen people on that one account doing jobs, then the same person whose account it is shouldn't be able to do 10 jobs a minute, I suppose. But take a look at this. This is a list of Facebook groups for these Deliveroo accounts. Now, many people might say it's just a group for them to come and chat. Well, no, it's more obvious than that, because if you see this group here, Deliveroo Group Sell Rent Accounts, posting about 5 times a day with 19,000 members in it. Deliveroo buying, selling accounts. Now, this is obviously not to say that all of these groups are renting out accounts, because this one here, for example, says quite clearly no renting or selling accounts. Presumably, that's a rule for which you get banned, but I strongly suspect there are lots of these groups on here, such as this one with 1,000 members buying and selling accounts. And these groups are just the public ones. Imagine how many there are that are private and unlisted, shared around amongst each other, and you have to know someone to get on the group to rent an account from someone. This is quite possibly a widespread scandal with thousands of people working unlawfully for any of these companies. But there's also one question that I'll leave you with, and it's back to the Refugee Council for this one. And again, there's two ways of looking at it. I did say it was the last one the last time, forgive me. At point 4, they say refugees make a huge contribution to the UK. It says around 1,200 medically qualified refugees are recorded on the British Medical Association's database. It is estimated that it costs around £25,000 to support a refugee doctor to practice in the UK. Training a new doctor is estimated at a cost between £200,000 and £250,000. So this is quite obviously making a distinction that refugees are a huge contribution to the UK because they are cheaper doctors. So on the one hand, that's an obvious argument. We need doctors in the UK. We need skilled medical practitioners in the UK. And if they are cheaper to train and practice and so on, then so be it. That's a good thing. And I did verify this in the British Medical Journal here, albeit this was published in 2006, so probably somewhat out of date. So take into account inflation, changes in cost of training and so on. The difference will be roughly the same. It says here the estimated courses for the exams to re-qualify in the UK, i.e. a migrant re-qualifying in the UK, is £3,500. So the Refugee Council's estimate of a cost of £25,000 to support a refugee to practice in the UK is probably about right. As against, in the BMJ, the cost of training a medical student of about £200,000. So I leave you with those questions. Which side of each of those fences do you sit? Because you could view any of those things in two different ways, depending on your own preferences and your personal viewpoint and standpoint, but there is always another way of looking at it. So I urge you to go back through those, look at those figures and see what you think. Let me know in the comments what you think about any of those things. And as always, thank you for watching. Please do subscribe and I'll see you next time.